Welcome to Live from My Drum Room with John DeChristopher. Here's part 2 of my interview with the great Jimmy Chamberlin of Smashing Pumpkins. I hope you've enjoyed part 1. If you haven't, be sure to check it out. Or if you haven't, I'm sorry you haven't enjoyed it. But if you haven't watched it, be sure to check it out or listen to it. And I do hope you enjoy part 2. I'll see you on the other side. And as always, thanks for watching and listening. See you in a bit. I want to give a quick shout out to a good friend of mine who's watching live. Joey Goodsell is watching. And Joey, great to see you, buddy. Thanks for tuning in. And he had a question to ask you, Jimmy. And he said, odd question, but what kind of throne do you sit on? The brand of throne, and is it a round throne or is it a saddle throne? I'm guessing it's a Yamaha throne.
Yep. It's a free throne.
the free model, the free because I'm an endorser model. Yeah.
It's on the page after the back cover of the catalog. It's a round throne. I'm a round throne guy. My family, like I'm half Hungarian and half English. So it's like, we have a wide frame in the back end. Some of us, our family reunion, there's a lot of real estate hanging over the chair. So the saddle throne doesn't do me any favors. The round throne is a lot better for me. I feel like I can move around better. And even if it's locked in, I can just slide on the throne. Whereas the saddle, I'm kind of moving my torso and not my body and my feet. So yeah, I like the round throne. Although I'm still, and I don't want to give my idea away, but I guess it's never going to happen anyway. I'm still waiting for somebody to make, you know how you like the new cars, when you get in, some of them will have, like a Mercedes or whatever, they'll have the air conditioned seats, right? Where you push the button and they're cool. Like, why don't we have the drum throne like that? Like, why we need somebody. Yeah. So Mr. Goodsell, maybe you could make air conditioned, just push a button and the cold air comes up and
I have that in my Tesla. It's been so hot here lately. I never thought I'd use it, but I do use it. Yeah.
Yeah. Hell yeah.
It's a nice feature.
And if you had it on your drum throne, you'd be in business.
Those sweaty gigs. Oh man, this is great. This is great. You made a point a minute ago. I'm going to try to jog my brain to go back to it, but just when you mentioned, jumping back a couple of minutes, you mentioned your sort of process for practicing is you put on a click track and you're working on some like older Pumpkin tunes for rehearsals. Those tunes originally were recorded. They weren't recorded with a click though, right? Those no,
those songs were just live to tape. So the way and all those drum performances were just live drum performances, and that's the way we played. So we didn't like the way the band sounded with click, and partially that was my fault because I never was that good at playing with it. Honestly, I'd always play with bands that were like stuff moving around. So in Corgan, especially, wanted to push choruses and pull verses back, and he didn't want to be married to something that was static. So all that stuff was just full takes to click, and then those guys would figure it out. And oftentimes, Billy would be attracted to drum takes that were maybe not my first pick, because there were draggy bits or parts that kind of launched into the stratosphere, but it worked for us. So up until Zeitgeist, and we got better at it as time went on. I think post Melancholy, like if you listen to Machine and the band's definitely becomes a better timekeeping unit. And then by the time we got to Zeitgeist, we still weren't playing the clicks, but we were using click starts. So we would know what the start tempos of the songs were. And we got to the point where, and we can do this live now too. We can roll off versions of songs with no click and have them be within 1-2 seconds of each other. You start to get that muscle memory.
Sure.
But no, those songs were all click, because oftentimes Billy would go back and replace the bass and would do multiple guitars. So we would play live as a band and only keep the drums, and then wipe everything else and then go and reconstruct the song with whoever was going to play what. But it got to be, it was always on me to play the take.
Yeah.
And those guys could just, figure it out in piecemeal. So it was always, if somebody fucked up the song while I was in the middle of a great take, it got to be, a problem, because I was, not the most mentally stable person back then and had a bit of a temper. But
no, but I understand.
I mean,
no, yeah.
God, what? But when it worked, it was great. I mean, the Gish stuff was done in 2 days, and I think a lot of those drum takes were just one take, one take, maybe 2 takes, and Butch was like, "Okay, we're done." Plus, we didn't have any money, so you only had money for one take.
Yeah, sure.
But as time went on, that stuff got to be, we would do 3-4 takes. I'm generally like a 3-4 take guy, and with the new stuff, because we are playing to a click, and I spent a lot of time working on my click playing over the last 10 years, and now I'm pretty good, really good at it, pretty good. I can move around the click without make it sound like an idiot, and I know what I'm doing, and I like it. I prefer it. I prefer recording to a click because it just solves a lot of issues for me that I don't need to be thinking about, right? So because oftentimes when we record a song, it'll just be Billy and I in the studio. So if you don't have the benefit of like a consistent bass player all the time, and you're trying to fill in cracks where, guitar is not in or guitar maybe out, it can get a little murky.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. No, I wondered, like, when you guys play these songs live too, are you putting in, are there sequencers and things that have to be
sometimes.
So that
in some of the newer material, we use backing tracks, which is great. I love it. But all the old stuff is just off the rails live. Which, it's fun to hear a concert that has both of those things, because I don't know, I'm just not a big like quantization, like all that stuff. I'm not, me, I'm not a quantized individual. I'm kind of all over the map, right? I'm here, I'm there, I'm everywhere. I'm not like walking
organic,
at 118 BPM to the store. I'm hurrying up to see a bird, or I'm slowing down to watch something on the ground, or I'm trying to, humanize things as much as I can, because I think that's important. And I think a lot of at least what's missing from some music for me is just the kind of what's not appealing to me is the overabundance of post-production and drumming. Because I know a lot of drummers that are great drummers that, you would imagine Jim Gordon going in and playing You're So Vain Today.
Yeah. Some
25-year-old kid would be Pro Tooling his drum set, and you'd be like, "Oh, what?"
Yeah, I know.
I know like Kenny Aronoff, like what do you have Kenny Aronoff? Like, why is there, or, Jimmy Chamberlin or John DeChristopher, what did you buy? And why did you buy this Ferrari if you're going to take a Ford motor and put it in it?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. No, I know, but you're right. But I hear this so much, Jimmy. I hear it so much from guys like you. That's the mentality out there, that it's like, well, there's that one section where it was just a, during the chorus, it just went up just a half a click. And it's like, oh my God, that's called an organic, it's called breathing, like.
That's right.
Geez.
And if you listen to like, okay, my daughter, when she was little, we got her a record player as soon as she was old enough, and she would go down and pick out records out of my collection. So, and she would just, before she could read, so she would just get the covers that she liked, right? So at one point she was listening to like Future Shock, Curtis Mayfield, like what's she playing in there, right? Like, oh my God.
Oh, that's so great.
But one of the records she had was Earth, Wind and Fire Fantasy, right? That greatest hits. And
yeah,
man, if you listen to that stuff, it just takes off at the end.
Yeah.
I mean, and you think when you hear like Celebration, or when you hear that stuff, you're like, God, it's so tight and it's so in the pocket. But then when you listen after you've been doing, you know, our jobs for a while, then you're like, wow, man, that's interesting. Like we covered Stairway to Heaven on our Shiny and Oh So Bright tour. So of course I knew it. I played it a nauseating amount of times when I was a kid, right? I knew it front to back, even the mistakes, whatever it is.
Yeah.
That song speeds up. I put a clock on it because I just wanted to get a tempo. It speeds up 18 BPM from start to finish.
Wow.
I mean,
yeah.
And when you're listening to it, you're like, man, there was no Bonham was such a great timekeeper.
Man. Yeah. I would have guessed that it sped up a little bit. I would have never thought 18 BPM. So that's significant. That's like,
yeah, that's my, I could be wrong, but that's my memory. It's something outlandish like that.
No,
but again, like we bought it because it was great. And we weren't thinking about the mathematical, qualifiers of the music. We were just simply thinking about how does it make us feel?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. One of my favorite Rolling Stones songs and one of my favorite all time songs, Honky Tonk Woman, you know?
Oh yeah. Yeah. By the end, they're cranking.
Yeah, they're cranking, you know? And as a kid, you're right. That came out in 1969. I was almost 9 years old and hearing that in the radio, and I couldn't hear it enough. I wish they would play it over and over again. And you know, it wasn't really until years later, like you say, like you listen to it and you go like, well, shit, yeah, there it is. The second verse, it goes.
Yeah.
And
it goes from like a blues cowbell to like a samba cowbell.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, my theory on that, I was fortunate to know Charlie really well. I never asked him about that song in particular. But he was funny whenever I would ask him about certain songs, he'd either say, I don't remember, or he'd say, you know, because we just decided to do it that way, you know, but I would bet you just made this point a minute ago. I'll bet they got such a great basic track. Jimmy Miller, the producer, said, fuck it. I know it's sped up.
It ain't going to get no better.
It ain't going to get no better. It had the mojo, and he was a drummer himself, Jimmy Miller. He probably said that had the magic. We're going to keep that. And you know, if Keith made a mistake or whatever, we'll fix that later. But, you know, recut the guitar track. But yeah, it's all those songs, like you say, you sort of had to live with it. And in that case, I'm glad they did, because it's such a organic masterpiece, you know.
It's a standard, right? I mean, it's become one of the greatest songs of all time. And if you read Keith's book, which I read when it came out, he talks about Charlie in such a reverent way. And he basically, when you distill the Stones down, Keith says, look, no Charlie, no Stones.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like,
yeah, exactly.
I mean, you know, Watts was like, he was just one of those guys that like, whatever he played was right. It's not like, you know, this part was better than this. Whatever he played was right. And it was, and even when you'd leave a snare drum out, and even like the Tattoo Hue or Emotional Rescue, like that stuff it's so burning and so intense in a minimalist way. I never got to meet Charlie, and I wasn't a fan of his when I was a young drummer, because I was into, you know, Jeff Beck and Tony Williams, and like I was into, you know, I want to play as many notes as I could in a bar, right? I'm not interested in that guy or you know, Don Henley. But as I got older and you try to do that stuff, you realize that like this guy it's not even a fair fight.
You know, I wish I could have got you both in the same room, because you guys would be instant best buds. You know, I mean, with your knowledge of jazz history and his, I would talk to him for hours, and I would be lost, because he would go so deep with some of these guys and records that I'm sure you would know right away what he was talking about, though. I mean, he was so into it.
Well, Don Lombardi, I did that Don Lombardi live. We did 2 parts. As you know, Don and I are connected at the hip as well, like you and I. And I love talking to Don, because we can go way, way, way deep. And Don was there, you know. Don was giving Elvin pictures of beer, you know. I mean his stories are just, I mean, I remember like me, Don, Joe Porcaro, and Ralph Humphrey in his office listening to a bass drum only Buddy Rich recording, only the bass drum.
Only the bass drum. Oh my God. Yeah, that would be Don. Yeah.
It was so amazing. But Don was saying that he was going to try to get me and Keltner on the same show, and so we could have a drum riff off bro down thing. So that would be super fun.
Oh, that.
But yeah, so I mean, cool. You know, those guys understood, you know, how to capture, and that was what's great about working with Butch Vig, because Butch was a drummer and a great drummer in his own right, and he knew things about your drumming that maybe you could do, but you weren't aware of, that they had so much value, right? So Butch would say, look, you know, this may be, you know, not of a consequence to you, but this is why your drumming to me has so much value. These are the things that you do that I have to have on this record. And it was interesting to have somebody that you trust with a different vantage point that was able to say, like, your hi-hat work, like that's like playing quarter notes on the ride while the left foot does eighth notes, you know, makes his chorus feel a certain way. Like, don't lose that, you know, don't try to reinvent the wheel here.
That's a really good example too, because I hear a lot of that, and you don't hear a lot of rock drummers in bands, you know, alternative bands playing with that kind of technique, you know, like that's like a Tony thing. I think of Tony when I hear those clicking eighth notes with your left foot on the hi-hat. I as a kid, I aspired to be able to play left-handed, but tried to play all that shit. Just really get that comfortable where you could get those eighth notes happening like that. And you got that down.
Yeah. Well, that's, you know, again, that's all that listening to Tony and also the Richard Bailey stuff on the first Jeff Beck record. I mean, that's really a lot of that stuff. You know, I think, but again, you know, you learn as a drummer, you learn as much from the other musicians as well. Like Max Middleton was a huge influence on me. The way he approached the keyboard was a huge influence on me. Bill Evans is a huge influence on me. I mean, John Coltrane, obviously a huge but also like, who's the, not, God, why can't I think of this guy's, like the singer in AC/DC, right? Brian Johnson.
Oh. Yeah.
I mean, when you listen to Back in Black and you listen to the interplay between the vocal cadence and the drums, your palms start sweating.
Yeah.
I mean, his timekeeping, like Sinatra level timekeeping, right? Like when you hear Frank play with time in a way that's supporting a narrative in a certain way, there's a power in that that's way beyond anybody who is doing things mathematically. And Brian Johnson is another person who, like, metronomically can sing like a drummer. And it's what gives the chugging in the drums such a ferocious pocket. When you hear the way he delivers the vocal on top of it, it becomes like a shaker part. And I think, you know, go back and listen to that record and listen to the more up-tempo stuff, and like listen to the cadence and the way he drops the vocals in the pocket. And you'll see that it's so additive to the drumming. Like Corgan and I talk about this all the time. I try to make him aware of, like, the vocal timing has a lot to do with the way the drums are perceived, right? But if you listen to like Sinatra with Nelson Riddle or anything, like the vocal, it dictates the time oftentimes. So having somebody who's you know, cognizant of that interplay and that relationship makes for us, like Robert Plant, right? Another great timekeeper. Phil Collins obviously was a great, you know, there's certain singers out there that get that hip shake thing. Paul Rogers, where the drums, Simon Kirke, there's a reason that stuff sounds so good. Like I talked to Roy Thomas Baker about the clave part in All Right Now. And he claimed that Paul played that clave while singing the lead vocal.
No, well, I had Simon on my show, and he said Paul did play the clave, but he didn't mention it was while he was singing the lead vocal. Holy shit!
And that could be rock and roll folklore for all I know. But just the fact that he was able to play that tight, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
so it gives you an idea of like his timekeeping ability. And
Sure.
that's, you know, him, Freddie Mercury, like those people had a real understanding of how their vocal cadence impacted the overall flow of the song.
That's a
Jagger, I mean,
Yeah, and that's really, and you mentioned Phil Collins too as a singing drummer, and that's a great example too. And I think you'd put Don Henley in that category too of somebody that, like,
yeah,
I think he's so overlooked as a drummer in terms of his timekeeping. He would never in a million years, uh, you know, present himself as a technical drummer by any stretch, but I think there's such a magic to his feel and to use, when you see him sing and play at the same time, it's really a lot harder to play those simple beats and sing the way he does and have it all. Like you just gave a great example, Jimmy. The two sort of work with each other. It's like a um, liquid sort of situation to the way they work together, the vocal and the
well,
drums.
anything that's creating time, you know, has an influence on the
Yeah.
whole holistic time. So I think those are important things. I met Nick Collins at in Miami. Nick's Phil's son came to see the show, and Phil was there, but he didn't come because he's obviously not feeling well. But I couldn't say enough things, and I felt a little bit bad because I just spent the whole time with Nick talking about his dad, because, you know, Brand X was just part of it was the exodus after the genesis of Tony Williams and all that stuff. The
Yeah.
second book in my Bible was Brand X, right? And I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
like that stuff, you know, unorthodox behavior, those records allowed you to see what was possible within a construct like that. And I worked with Percy Jones after that. I worked with Percy about 10 years ago on a Coltrane compilation that we did here in Chicago. It was amazing. But I got about 3 weeks after that, I got this thing in the mail, and I was like, this feels like a drum head, right? So I opened it up, and it was a drum head, and it was signed by Phil Collins. He drew a picture of his drum set, and then he apologized for not coming to the show. And it's like one of my most prized possessions.
Oh,
I've got
man.
two great drum heads. It's that one, and then I got one from the NAMM show. That's it's all autographed to my wife, to Lori, because she was like, you're not going to get the drum head, so I'm going to go get the drum head. But it's Earl Palmer, it's Roy Haynes, it's JR, it's all the Yamaha guys, right? And it's all to Lori, right? It's all to my wife, Lori. It's the coolest thing ever. It's like Roy Haynes. So I mean, cool. Roy is such a cool dude, and all those guys were, you know, Steve Jordan. I mean, everybody signed it, and it's just the coolest. Like, and that was the thing I was trying to articulate in Modern Drummer. Like, when you get to the point, like one of the greatest things about my gig is being friends with people like you, and being friends with Erskine. And I stalked Erskine in Europe when he was on tour, and I was over there. He's like, "Oh, you're here again?" I saw him like 3 nights in a row because I was just rehearsing, so I was off at night. And we saw him in Berlin. I saw him in Sweden. I saw him, I think, in Spain. Bill Frisell, we were stalking. Like, you get to go and, like, you know, be contemporaries with these people, and through people like yourselves you meet, and groove nights like we used to do with Yamaha, you'd end up hanging with Mickey Curry or Steve Jordan or Clyde and Jabo. And I mean, that was just those nights were always just a dream. I'll never forget the Zildjian party. You threw that Zildjian party, and Joe LaBarbera was playing, and Freddie Gruber was up on the stage yelling at him about something, and he was trying to play some drum solo. I was like, what the hell is going on?
Oh man, only Freddie could get away with that. I know, Joe LaBarbera. And Freddie's going, Joe, wait a minute.
You're not doing that right. Like, what's going on here? It's funny you bring up that first PASIC I did. You know, the first PASIC was like, I had never done a drum clinic before, and Joe Testet roped me into doing pay. Oh, you'll be great. Just go play a few songs. I'm like, I don't even have any songs. Like, okay, I to put it together. And then I get there, and it's like, it's Tommy Igoe, Peter, and then me. I'm like last. I got to follow Erskine, right? And then the night before, I was still drinking back then, right? And then, like, the night before, they took me all out. Me, Freddie Gruber, Erskine, all these guys are all drinking. The next day, I wasn't feeling great, and I'm doing my thing, and I'm thinking like, oh my God, this is the most uncomfortable thing I've ever done in my entire life. The room is super bright. Everybody's sitting on folding chairs with their arms crossed. And I looked over and Peter's sitting in the front row, and he's just, you know, how he does, he's just going like this. He's going, interesting. I'm like, oh my, and then the rest of the clinic, I was like, don't look at Peter. Don't look at Peter.
Oh, but I don't know what I would do if I had to sit up there and play and have Peter Erskine in the front row. Look, I would lose my mind.
Well, that's exactly what you do. That's exactly what happened. I was like, oh my God, this is, I can't end fast enough. Yeah, and then, you know, oh man, that was great.
Was that in Columbus? Was that, do you remember where it was? I remember that.
It was in Nashville.
It was in Nashville.
Okay. Nashville or Indy. Yeah. One of those.
Yeah, I remember Tom.
No, you know, I don't mind doing them now. I just take my lumps.
You do a great job. I know I saw that one. I think you did one later in Louisville, Kentucky, maybe in the early 2000s.
Maybe, yeah.
I remember that was a really great one. I was going to say, you know, a couple of times I've been with Peter, and he'll say, hand me a stick and go, do me a favor and just play this for me so I can hear it. Oh, and it's like, are you kidding me? And I'm laughing because there can't be anything. I may as well be naked, you know, standing.
Yeah. No, that's it.
Yeah. As Vinnie Colaiuta once said, naked in the 405 freeway. You know what I mean? You couldn't be any more exposed. And it's just, it's like, just play that for me for a minute so I can hear what it sounds like. Oh my God.
Well, I mean, but you know, ultimately what you end up realizing is that, you know, everybody in our community has everybody's back. Yeah. And, you know, I've done those clinics where I did that one in London where it's me, Bozio, Bissonette, Arnoff, Thomas Lang, I mean, and Jimmy Chamberlin. And I'm like, wait a minute, what? What? No, but you know, those guys are still some of my best friends. I mean, Kenny and I are super tight. Terry and I are really, really pals. Tom, I mean, all of them. Kenny, I mean, Kenny comes to see me play jazz gigs. It's like, they were like, look, we're just here to do what we do. Right. We're not here to do what he does, and you're not here to do what he does. And we're just here to just celebrate the fact that we, you know, just try to live in gratitude, right? For ourselves and for each other. And I think once, you know, you hear guys at that level, you know, obviously they're a little bit older than me and people that I've been in awe of my entire life. When you realize that they're you both have the same job, right? And you may paint a little differently, but it's not nonetheless compelling.
Yeah. Yep. Well said. Yeah. And like you say, that's the great thing about being a drummer is no one's ever gonna, you know, you'd have to be a real dick to see somebody putting their best effort out there and be critical of it. And in that case, that wouldn't even apply to you because you can hang with all those guys. They'd be the first to tell you you can hang with all those guys. But to your point, I've done gigs on Martha's Vineyard with this guitar player that plays in this band that Rick Morotta and his brother Jerry play in, the Morotta brothers. So this guy John would do these side gigs on a Thursday night, and I'd go play with them, and Rick and Jerry would come and sit in the audience and talk about but you know, after a couple of times I was like, okay, this is I'm going to do the best I can, and after Rick would bust my balls, which he would do anyway, he'd make fun of how my snare drum sounds or say I'm not hitting hard enough, you know, hit the drum harder. And I said, the guy hires me because I don't play loud. That's why he likes me. But, you know, but once I get past that, it's like, okay, I know this Allman Brothers tune and I can play it. I can get through it. I just got to not look at those two knuckleheads.
Yeah, right. Those guys are the worst. I mean, they're, you know, they're obviously, you know, incredible drummers. And Rick, you know, he used to host all those group nights. You know, and he's a funny guy, and he's very entertaining, and he's, you know, smarter than you, better than you.
Yeah, everything. Yeah, I know.
And he's introducing you.
He is a funny guy. Oh yeah, it's yeah.
Rick, the gadded beat, right?
Yeah.
The
Chucky's in Love.
Chucky's in Love. That's it. Rick was the one who came up with that shit first, I think.
You're absolutely right. No, he's told me the story. I hear that story a lot, Jimmy. I see a lot of Rick.
I'm putting it out there. I mean, I love Steve too, but and nobody does it like Steve, of course. But somebody sent me. I think it was Vic sent me something. He was like, "Look, Morotta was doing this. He did this first."
I'm going to tell him. He's going to be so happy you said that. He's going to be so happy that.
Well, I saw Rick. We did a groove night in. We did a Groove All Stars thing in, I want to say it was in Mexico City.
Yes, I remember. I didn't go to that, but I remember when you guys did that.
It was me, Terry Lynn Carrington, Sonny Emery,
JR,
Rick, JR. Yeah. It was fun. And who's the guy who plays drums? Abe Laboriel Sr. was actually there.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a kick ass. We all played Earth, Wind and Fire covers. It's one of those, but it was super fun. And Terry Lynn, I remember, was so good that day. I mean, she's goddamn, she's so good. I love her playing. She is really like top of the heap. And creatively intense. But Rick had just found out. Well, he had the Everybody Loves Raymond song, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I saw him, and he looked a little ashen, and I'm always ready to wind him up, right? If he doesn't look great, I'm like, man, you're not looking that great, right? Like, what, you got a cold or something, right? I mean, because he always does it to us, right? And he said something, I can't remember, I'm going to misquote this, but he said something like, "No, I just found out how much money I'm making from the TV show." I mean, you talk about a comeback, right? When you tell somebody they don't look that great, and then they tell you it's because I just found out how fucking rich I am, motherfucker. I was like, oh, okay. Is there any catering around?
I know. No, he's well. I'm going to see him in 2 days. We go down. Kelly's sister has a place in the vineyard, and we'll be down there for about 5 weeks. And Rick has
one
a place.
He owns, you mean?
Well, he has a place in the vineyard too, and we'll be spending a lot of time with him. So I'm going to make sure he watches this episode because
I love Rick. I mean, he's literally one of the greatest. I mean, he's another reason. Like,
he sure is.
I mean, I used to look at those Steely Dan liner notes and go, "God damn, who is this guy? And what's he doing with his left foot? What's that hi-hat shit?"
Yeah.
I mean, his interview in Drumhead, I don't know if you've ever read it.
I have, yeah.
It's one of the greatest interviews, and really, God bless him for saying what happened to him. You know, I mean, it's really like he had a great New York experience. I mean, really, like that's. I mean,
no,
but again, him and his brother are, incredibly rich assets to our community.
Yeah. Well said. I mean, incredibly talented and creative, and Rick is such a natural talent, and Jerry too, both of them. But I mean, started playing drums when he was 19, and was working in the studios. Andy Newmark tells a great story. Andy took lessons. He was a trained drummer and was doing gigs as a teenager. He's a little younger than Rick. Rick starts playing drums at 19, and within a year, he's like working in the studios in New York, like doing first call sessions, right? I mean, yeah, it's just, in the days, Jimmy, when you'd go in and a producer, you'd get hired to do a jingle for $25 or $50, whatever they got paid back then, $100 or something. And the guy'd say, "That was great. What are you doing tomorrow?" You know what I mean? Yeah. Well, come back tomorrow and I got some more work for you. And it just kept going. And then his name started he'd get a call from this guy saying, "I heard you worked for this guy. I got this other thing happening." Okay, sure. And it's just all of a sudden he's playing on these records, and it's an incredible story. It really is.
It is. And it was so fun to read it in Drumhead, because I had known the kind of broad strokes of it, and obviously was familiar with a lot of his, recorded body of work. But just the way it happened for him. And, you
Yeah.
know, there's a lot to be said for, you know, that natural ability, and then the ability to also focus and put time into it, and treat it with respect. I mean, I often tell people, like, you know, the oldest relationship I have is the relationship with my drum set. I mean, it's 51 years I've been playing now. So it's
Yeah.
older than my relationship with my parents even, because they died some time ago. So
Hmm.
it's you know, important that I honor that at all times, because it's not the drumming and the rewards and the awards and the recognition that defines me. It's the covenant between me and my instrument that defines me, and how I honor that and celebrate it. That's the root of what qualifies somebody as a human being, is that they honor themselves in a way that's honest, right?
Yep.
They have those deep, honest conversations with themselves that nobody else has to hear, but just to have something like the drums to keep you as a barometer it's an insanely cool thing to have. It's much, I liken it to like a martial art, or something that you never really get, you dedicate your life to it. And it's always something that you carry with you, and it becomes a reflecting pool of the other things in your life, like your relationship with your family, how you relate to your wife, how you feel about your other people.
Yeah. 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 Well said. Well, I know we've been going for a while, and I know you've got other places to go, but I want to touch quickly before we wrap things up on playing with Frank Catalano, and really getting to explore, you know, your jazz roots and your jazz side, and just maybe you could talk about that for a second, and you know, kind of how you've had that opportunity to do that.
Yeah, playing with Frank's been great. I mean, it's really, I've got to play with some great other great musicians, like, you know, John Benitez I played with in New York, and Theo Hill, and Vic Juris we played with when Vic was still with us. We did a tour in Japan with Vic, which was incredible to work with him. But yeah, the jazz stuff is really, you know, it's again, it's another way to kind of keep yourself honest, and not allow yourself to kind of not allow. I always call it not letting the concrete dry, right, and not letting your feet get stuck in the concrete, like just to keep moving. You know, I started doing it about 10 years ago, and I was kind of on the fence about doing it at first, because I didn't feel like I had put the time in respect to my right hand, and being able to play articulately, and express myself within the context of how I'd like to be expressed in that architecture. So I worked really hard on it. I mean, I worked for a couple of years on, you know, my right hand, and getting that back to where I could play, you know, a pretty decent swing feel. And then, you know, I take some lessons from time to time from this guy Steve Lyman in New York, who's a kind of a jazz independence guru. We work a lot on stick control stuff, just between the left hand and the right foot. So that's another. It's just stuff that I like to do to get me out of the pumpkin's head, because the jazz stuff really comes back and rewards me in my day gig, because it forces you to deal with consistencies and inconsistencies all the time, right? That stuff, some of the stuff is, it's not necessarily hard to play, but it's as hard as you want to make it, right? It's
Sure.
how lucid do you want to be in a jazz context? Do you want to be able to be, you know, John Riley or Bill Stewart? You know, some of the guys that I really love that are around now, Marcus Gilmore, like, there's a lot of room to grow within that context. With the rock stuff, there's a lot of room to grow, but it percolates at a much slower rate. So in the jazz world, when I went to see Ari Honig with Scott Coley, with Kenny Warner in Boston not too long ago, and like watching those guys, or Nate Wood, like watching those guys articulate on the drum set now in a modern way, is really inspiring to me. And I like, I don't want to be that type of drummer, but I want to be able to latch onto that stuff as a potential destination down the road. And I'm just the type of person that enjoys kind of working on that stuff. And
That's
I
great.
feel like it makes me more of a participant in my own life than just kind of, I mean, I could just be the pumpkin drummer and still get the modern drummer cover, maybe, but I feel like it is the other stuff that I do that really, it's like, you know, what do you do when no one's looking, right? It's like, that's kind of what defines us. Everybody knows what I do when people are looking, but do they know, like, or do I know what I'm doing when people aren't looking? Am I practicing my independent stuff, or am I working with Frank, or putting myself out there? Like my rule is generally I won't say no to gigs that come up, no matter how out of weird they might be. Like I'm more into doing stuff like that than I am like playing on, you know, band X, super famous band X's record. I'd rather play on some unknown dude's record who's got something wacky that's fun, or go play, you know, a gig with things that are like, guys want to play stuff in odd time signatures or stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It just
No,
keeps me honest. I mean, I don't mean to make it sound like it's a tool, because playing with Frank is an intense and fun thing. I mean, I play with Julian Smith and Randy Randy Ingram. So I mean, some new great jazz players, and when you play with those guys, you become a better player. I mean, Randy Ingram is, if you haven't heard his solo stuff, I mean, he's like a Bill Evans-esque piano player, and his sense of time is incredible.
Well, I think it speaks volumes too, and I think you're being humble, because I think the fact that that you can play with these guys and you can hang really speaks to you putting the work in. You know what I mean? You've put the work in to be a better drummer in this entirely different way than what's your kind of comfort zone. You know, like you can wake up in the morning and you can play a Pumpkins gig. I don't want to say in your sleep. That's not fair to say that, but you know what I'm saying. I mean, you know those songs inside and out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And on your worst day, you could have the flu, but you could go in and put in a great night on stage with the Pumpkins. But you got to know your shit. You got to be on your toes to play at the level that you're playing at with these other players. And that, I think that's great, man. And I'll just say this too, Jimmy. I think it's so cool that you've had this, you know, as a kid, this was the first kind of music that turned you on, or one of the first things. I know you were into a lot of the rock bands too, but like to be able now at this point in your life to have that other side and be able to fulfill that part of it is so great. And I'm so happy for you.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it really is a nice outlet for me, and something that really gives me an incredibly rich and vibrant alternative vantage point into music, right? And I think that's like a lot when you talk about early Pumpkin stuff. None of those influences were from contemporary sources. I mean, all of those drum influences were from music that was completely different to what we were playing. So the more you can listen to, you know, Zakir Hussain, or whoever you're listening to, Dan Weiss, like if you can start to root in the purposeness of that type of playing and bring it forward into your day gig, as I call it, like it makes you sound like way more inventive than you are, because you're just it's like when you talk to, like, you think you know something about, like, just let's say you know something about like World War II, right? And you know, like, what you learned in high school history, and you got an A in the class, and then you meet somebody from Russia, and they start talking about it from their side, and then you realize you only know about 40% of the story. So it's music is a lot like that. Like we tend to only know a little bit of the story. Have you read that book, Drumming Men?
No.
It's all about the early. Well, right now it is. I'm just on the first 2 chapters, but you should pick it up. It's really good. I'll send you a picture of the cover. I don't even know who wrote it. Somebody recommended it to me, maybe Mark Griffith. But it's incredible, because it talks about Kenny Clark and Max and those guys, and kind of where they came from, and how, you know, the the ability to place time on the ride cymbal as opposed to the kick and snare, just that simple thing was probably a big part of the reason that bop even happened.
Wow.
So, you know, it's, and he really does an elegant job of talking about the gravity of that shift in timekeeping with, you know, Chick Webb and like where it was before, the boom, cop, boom, boom, you know, to guys like playing time with the ride and the hat and then dropping bombs on the kick drum.
Right.
Nobody was doing that shit until those guys started playing like that, and then having to solo within the context of a head, a chorus. You know, there was a lot of things that went on that people don't name check now that were really part of the Dizzy, Charlie Parker whole movement forward. And then if you know that stuff, it makes you want to look for like what is today's version of that stuff. Like is it the hi-hat on the left? I mean, it could be anything. It could be something that simple, but it's something that, you know, can redirect your playing in a way that's like when you try to play a reggae beat for the first time and you realize that the bass drum's all wrong.
Yeah. Or in my case, for the 100th time.
Yeah, you know, the same here. Yeah, same. Like, there's a reason I never play reggae beats, right? Because I just can't. So.
No, but that's a great analogy, though. Yeah, it's all those things that when you start to really think about the evolution and how these things happened. I do.
Yeah, and you think about Ringo, right? Like the things that Ringo were doing that were like became like, hey, play the Ringo beat, like. Right. Yeah.
Opening the hi-hat and getting that wash sound that became such a staple in that sound. I do, before I forget.
And now it's like, can you close the hi-hat a little bit?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I want to just share this photo of my buddy on the cover of Modern Drummer magazine and remind everybody this is out right now, the July issue. Check it out. Jimmy Chamberlin. And I'm so honored to be right there in the bottom of the page where I belong.
Come on, John. You need to get your own cover, man. It's like I'm gonna write you in the reader's poll.
Thank you, my friend. And Vince Wilburn, I don't know if you've checked out Vince's interview. It's great. I don't know if you know Vince, but he's another Chicago guy too.
Yeah, I know Vince. Yeah, of course.
You know Vince, of course. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Miles Davis,
we're pals.
Nephew. He's great. I love Vince.
He's one of the sweetest guys. I mean, he's a sweetheart. He's always been so kind to me. Yeah. He used to come to Pumpkin gigs all the time and hang out. And then I realized he was related to Miles Davis, and I was like, damn, another reason to be nervous.
Yeah, exactly. Miles' nephew is
just what I need
in the audience tonight. Yeah. Oh man. Well, Jimmy, this has been a blast, my friend. Wow.
Yeah, always.
So much fun. Thank you so much for being here today. And I want to thank everybody for watching. And I kept you here longer than I said I would, but I feel like we could go another 2 hours easy, as we tend to do.
I mean, I never have anything better to do than sit and talk to you. So I'm all good, man.
Thank you, brother. Likewise too. Thank you. I want to thank my buddy, Joey Goodsell, once again for tuning in. I think the first time he's watched live. So Joey, thanks for tuning in. And
and Jimmy, I wanted to tell everybody I'm wearing my milestone drum shirt.
Yeah, check that out. Rudiments company.
I know. Yeah. We played those milestone snares. Oh my God, this sounds. I bought a reissued Dynasonic to play with Frank, and then Ron sent me one of those milestones. I'm like, every time he sends me a snare, he makes all my other snares redundant. Right?
I gotta check one out. I know.
I mean, it's a beautiful instrument. I mean, he's a beautiful man, and he makes some of the greatest. I mean, well, the greatest drums. I mean, he gifted me his prototype titanium snare at a gig in Vancouver or Seattle, and I put it up on the drum kit for sound check. And then he goes, "Well, yeah, just take it with you." I said, "Take it with me. I'm going to play it tonight." He's like, "You're going to play it tonight at an arena show?" And I go, "Yeah." He's like, "Won't the sound man care?" And I'm like, yeah, he's going to care that it sounds better than my signature snare. I mean, it sounds great, right? I mean, I've been playing that snare ever since I got it, and now it's on. I think it's the only snare on Autumn, or it's not on the new record we just recorded. It's the It's the only snare I used on the new record that's coming out early next year. So yeah, Ron's incredible.
Well, great, man. Great shout out to Ron Danette. Yeah. All right, JC. Hang tight for 1 second. We'll end the stream. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll see you soon. Big hand for Jimmy Chamberlin. And thanks again, Jimmy. Hang on.
Of course.
All right, part 2 of my episode with Jimmy Chamberlin. I hope you enjoyed it. If you do, be sure to give it a like and maybe leave a comment. And as always, even if you didn't like it anyway, but don't leave a comment. But I do appreciate you watching and listening, and I really do hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe. Remember, no drummers are ever harmed on Live from My Drum Room. And drummers, when in doubt, leave it out. I'll see you soon. Thanks.